Tom Thumb. Once upon a time, there lived a poor man and a woman who had no children. Their only wish was to have a child. One night as they sat on their porch, they saw a falling star. The woman said, "Let's wish for a baby, no matter how small it would be." 7 months passed and their wish came true. A child no bigger than a thumb was born. Because he was so little, they called him Tom Thumb. And they loved him with all their hearts. Tom became wise and nimble, but he never grew in size. His parents were very careful to make sure nothing would happen to him. One day the boy asked his father if he could help lead the horse to where he was working. Tom told his dad, "I can help lead the horse by sitting by his ear to give him directions." Tom was doing a great job directing the horse as they went through the woods. Along the way, they met 2 strangers. The strangers had never seen such a small boy. They offered Tom Thumb's dad as much money as he wanted to sell Tom Thumb to them. They told his dad Tom Thumb would travel in exhibitions making a fortune because so many people would come to see the small boy. Tom Thumb's dad was upset and told the men Tom was not some jester and he was not for sale. Tom Thumb talked to his father about he may not be able to work so hard as he was getting older. Please let me go with these men and take the money so you can finally live a good life. I promise I will return soon. His father let Tom Thumb go, hesitantly, with the 2 men. When the 2 men stopped for lunch near the pastor's house, Tom Thumb jumped down and ran into the house and into a mouse hole. The 2 men tried to reach him, but Tom Thumb told them to go ahead and he would catch up with them. The men went on their way. Tom Thumb decided to stay the night in the mouse hole. Just as he was about to fall asleep, he heard some voices. The voices were that of robbers who were going to rob the pastor's house. Tom Thumb had an idea to save the pastor's house. He started to speak, but the robbers could not see him because he was so small. Follow my voice. I can help you with the robbery because I am so small I can fit anywhere. When they began to sneak around, Tom Thumb started talking very close to where one of the pastor's maids was sleeping. He woke up the maid and she chased the robbers away. Tom Thumb went to lay down in the hay in the barn to get a good night's sleep. When he awoke in the morning, he realized the cow had eaten the hay, and Tom Thumb was stuck in the cow's stomach. Tom Thumb began to yell for help. Tom Thumb managed to escape from the cow, only to be gobbled up by a wolf who was sneaking around the barn. Tom Thumb whispered from inside the wolf that he knew of a house filled with ham and bacon, and he could lead him there. Tom Thumb was secretly leading the wolf back to his parents' house. When they arrived, Tom Thumb's father began to get ready to attack the wolf. He had no idea Tom Thumb was inside. All of a sudden, he heard Tom's voice. Tom was rescued from the wolf by his father, who promised never to sell him again. Not for all the riches in the world. Tom Thumb and his parents lived happily ever after. The end. Long ago, in a small village, a woodcarver named Geppetto made a wooden puppet. It looked so much like a real boy that Geppetto gave it a name, Pinocchio. The old man was so happy, he showed the puppet to his cat Figaro and his goldfish Cleo. As Geppetto showed his puppet to his dear pets, a small cricket named Jiminy Cricket snuck into Geppetto's house to have a warm night's sleep. Jiminy Cricket watched as Geppetto set the puppet down and gazed out the window at the stars. "Look at that! The wishing star!" Geppetto cried. Geppetto wished Pinocchio was a real boy. Soon it was bedtime, and Geppetto, Figaro, Cleo, and Jiminy Cricket all fell asleep. Before long, a beautiful light filled the workshop and woke up Jiminy Cricket. It was the Blue Fairy. She had heard Geppetto's wish and was there to make Pinocchio a real boy. She touched the puppet with her magic wand, and Pinocchio came to life. But Pinocchio had to prove he was brave, truthful, and unselfish to become a real boy. The Blue Fairy knew Pinocchio would need help, so she made Jiminy Cricket his helper, so he would help him to choose between right and wrong, and prove himself. Geppetto was delighted with Pinocchio, and he sent him off to school like a good parent. On the way to school, Pinocchio met a sly fox, who said Pinocchio could make a lot of money, and didn't have to go to school. Jiminy Cricket didn't trust the sly fox. The sly fox said he could spend all of his time having fun in the theater, instead of studying at school. Pinocchio said, "Okay!" and off he went with the sly fox to the theater owner. That night, the theater owner put Pinocchio on stage. He was a big hit, as he sang and danced for the crowd. The crowd threw money on the stage. Jiminy Cricket, who was in the crowd, worried. After the show, the theater owner locked Pinocchio up and said, "You will live here and make me lots of money." Pinocchio and Jiminy Cricket wondered how he could escape. Luckily, the Blue Fairy arrived. She asked Pinocchio why he missed school. He lied. She asked him more questions, and each time he told a lie, his nose grew longer and longer. The Blue Fairy reminded him to tell the truth if he wanted to be a real boy. Pinocchio promised he would tell the truth. She fixed his nose and set him free. The next day, Pinocchio met the sly fox again. The sly fox convinced Pinocchio to not go to school, but instead play and have fun all day. Pinocchio followed the fox, not returning home after regular school time. Geppetto was worried and went to look for Pinocchio. Geppetto sailed his boat to search for Pinocchio, and he was swallowed up by a huge whale. When Pinocchio returned home from playing all day, he found this out, and he knew he must save Geppetto. Pinocchio and Jiminy Cricket found the huge whale, and they teased him with the fish. The whale grabbed the fish, the pole, Pinocchio, and Jiminy Cricket, and they were all swallowed into his belly. They found Geppetto in the whale's belly too. They must find a way to escape from the whale. They decided they would make the whale sneeze, and they would all escape when the whale opened his mouth. It worked, but when the whale saw them in the water, he thrashed around, knocking everyone about. Pinocchio had to grab Geppetto to save him. After a while, the water settled down and Geppetto and Jiminy Cricket awoke on the beach. They found Pinocchio lying lifeless on the rocks. Geppetto was heartbroken, and he carried his son home in his arms, convinced he had lost Pinocchio forever. Back in the workshop, Geppetto and Jiminy Cricket cried, and then all of a sudden, the blue fairy appeared. She touched her wand on Pinocchio and said, "Awake!" Pinocchio awoke, and the blue fairy said, "By saving Geppetto, you have proven yourself to be brave, truthful, and unselfish." "I am a real boy!" shouted Pinocchio. Pinocchio, Geppetto, Jiminy Cricket, and all the pets celebrated and danced as Geppetto's wish had come true. Pinocchio was a real boy. Every afternoon after school, the children loved to play in a huge garden that surrounded a deserted castle. They loved to play there. One day while playing, a great voice yelled out, "What are you doing in my garden?" It seems the giant had returned back to his castle, and he did not want the children to play there. He shouted at them and told them to leave and never come back. They all ran away as fast as they could. The giant then built a huge spiked fence around his garden, so none of the children could ever get in. The giant put a large gate in the fence with a sign that said, "Keep out," in big black letters. The children would pass by and look sadly at their favorite place to play. They really missed playing in the beautiful garden. Soon fall and winter came and covered everything in snow and frost. The giant looked out his castle window at his snow-covered garden and wished for spring to come. Spring did come, everywhere except in the giant's garden. The snow and frost were thrilled to have a place to stay forever. One morning, the giant was lying awake in bed when he heard a bird singing. He leapt from his bed to look out the window. His whole garden was in spring bloom. The snow and frost were finally gone. Then he noticed all the children playing in his garden. You see, they had snuck into the garden through a hole in the wall, and spring had followed them in. One little boy was crying because he could not climb the trees like all the other children. He was just too small to reach. The giant helped the small boy to the top of the tree. The little boy gave the giant a hug and a kiss and said thank you. The giant thought it was time to let the children play in his garden, so he knocked down the big wall. The children played every day in the giant's beautiful garden. When the giant realized he had not seen the little boy he had helped to the top of the tree, he asked the other children, "Where is your little friend?" "We do not know," said the children. The giant asked the children every day if they had seen their little friend. The children told the giant, "The only day we saw him was the day you knocked down the wall." The years passed and the giant grew old and weak, and he could no longer play with the children. One cold winter morning, he was looking out the window, and he noticed the most beautiful tree he had ever seen.
Wow!
The tree was covered with delicate white blossoms with silver fruit, and beneath the tree was the little boy who had gone missing for so long. "He's come back at last," said the giant joyfully. Forgetting how old and weak he was, the giant rushed down the castle stairs and hurried across the garden. But as he neared closer towards the little boy, he saw bruises and cuts and nail marks in his hands and feet. "Who has hurt you?" asked the giant. "As old and feeble as I am, I will kill the people who have done this to you." The small child smiled gently and said, "Hush, don't be angry, but come with me." "Who are you?" whispered the giant, falling to his knees. "A long time ago, you let me play in your garden," the child replied. "Now, I want you to come and play in my garden. It is called Paradise." That afternoon, when the children came to play in the garden in the winter snow, they found their giant friend lying dead. The old giant looked so peaceful. He seemed to have a beautiful, peaceful, gentle smile on his quiet face. The giant was covered in small, beautiful white flower blossoms. The children thought he looked so happy and at rest. They said sweet prayers for him to be playing with children angels in a gorgeous paradise garden forever. The children always remembered the giant for his kind heart and generous spirit, and played in his garden forever. There once was a poor country man whose only inheritance to his 3 sons was his farm, his donkey, and his cat. The eldest son inherited the farm, the second eldest the donkey, and the youngest son inherited the cat. "What on earth will I do with a cat? I can barely feed myself," said the youngest son. "Let alone how can I offer this pet anything? I have no money and am so poor." "Don't worry," said the cat. "If you can get me a sack and a pair of boots, you will see I am the most valuable thing your father ever owned." The son brought the cat what he asked for, as he knew he had nothing to lose. The cat put on the boots and took the sack to catch a plump rabbit. The cat wore the boots on his journey. He would be called Puss in Boots. He caught a plump rabbit and brought it to the king. Puss in Boots told the king the plump rabbit was a gift from his master, the Duke of Carabas. For several weeks, Puss in Boots brought the king many gifts from his master. The king was very curious about Puss in Boots and his master, the Duke of Carabas. But the king knew that the Duke was friendly and had the most well-behaved cat he had ever met. The king did not know that Puss in Boots had made up the name Duke of Carabas for his poor master. One day, the king and his daughter were riding in their carriage by the river. Puss in Boots told his master to take off his pants and shirt and jump in the river. His master agreed to do so. Then Puss in Boots yelled out, "Help! Help! The Duke of Carabas is drowning!" as the king's coach passed by him. The king ordered his driver to stop, and he told his guards to rush over and save the Duke of Carabas. The king saw Puss in Boots yelling and knew he must help him, as he had been so generous to the king. Puss told the king the Duke's clothes had been stolen. So the king offered the Duke a fine suit of his own clothes to put on. The Duke of Carabas got in the carriage for a ride. The king's daughter quietly told the Duke he looked very handsome. The Duke looked at her and told her she was very beautiful. Along the way, Puss had asked all the farmers and workers on the road, "If the king drives by, you must tell him the owner of all these lands is the Duke of Carabas, or the ogre who lives in the castle will eat you." All the farmers and workers answered when asked that the Duke of Carabas was their landowner when the king asked them. Puss in Boots ran ahead to the ogre's castle and asked the ogre about the trick he could do by changing into a small mouse from a big ogre. Puss in Boots told the ogre no one believed he could do a trick like that. The ogre said, "Watch me." as he turned into a small little mouse. Puss in Boots grabbed the mouse and ate it up, and that was the end of the big bad ogre. Just then, the king's carriage arrived at the castle gate. Puss in Boots ran to meet the carriage and said, "Welcome to the castle of the Duke of Carabas." His master could not believe what was happening. On the long ride in the carriage, he had fallen in love with the king's daughter. And Puss in Boots had planned everything to work out perfectly. The Duke asked the king if he could marry his daughter. And the king said yes, of course. The Duke of Carabas and the princess were married and lived happily ever after in their castle. Puss in Boots was named a great lord and never had to hunt for mice ever again. Puss in Boots proved he was the best inheritance, as he had promised his master.